What's up, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome back to another episode of COASTER-net Uncut. I'm, of course, Andrew Barczyk from Chicago, Illinois, joined by Mr. New Coaster Writer himself, Mr. Dan.
I got a haircut, Andy.
Oh, finally! Geez, you were looking kind of scruffy there for a while.
I was.
But as you know, Danny last week went out to both Hershey and Kings Island to ride Candymonium and Orion. So, Danny, you're going to give us a little review here tonight, but I'm curious to know first, because I was thinking about maybe going to the first rider auction, and then all the craziness happened, and ultimately I did not go. But how was that first rider auction at Kings Island?
No, the first rider auction was really great, and if you saw the live video that we did driving by Claremont Steel earlier that morning, you heard me sort of give the rundown as to what we did. But ultimately, the first rider event for Orion ran from 5 p.m. to 10 p.m. On Wednesday, which was July 1st. So the day before opening to the public, a small group of folks, a small select few rode earlier in that day, a very small number of news media outlets and a few local bloggers, but certainly not the big media event that we've become accustomed to at a park like Kings Island or Cedar Point. Very few coaster enthusiasts there. Ace was not invited. Most of your coaster blogs were not invited either. It was a very small event. But the first rider auction went very, very well. There was a couple hundred people there. I think they said around 300 attendees, and raised a new record for Kings Island of $160,000, which was a very nice sum of money to go to a kid again. But right on cue, right at 5 o'clock, opened up the line for the ride. And I would say that first ride, Sue and I just raised the minimum 150. I had a few donations from a few folks, and then threw in the rest myself. I think Sue had just thrown it all in herself right there. So we were in the bronze tier. They had the gold, silver, and bronze based on how much you raised. So we were in the bronze, so we got into the queue last. I'd say we waited about 40 minutes or so for that first ride. But then they had food open at the Coney Barbecue. People started dispersing after that first ride. So generally, we were waiting anywhere from maybe 10 minutes to maybe 20 to 25 after that first ride. Ultimately got 8 rides in all. And if you know Kings Island well, as most of you do know that this time of year, when they close at 10 o'clock, it's just barely getting dark at 10 o'clock. Like even at 9:30, it's not completely dark yet. Aside from the folks who went on the 4th of July when they were actually open till 10, we're the only people who are getting night rides on Orion pretty much all year, unless they extend hours at some point. It doesn't sound like they're going to, unless we go deep into the fall here in October. But got a couple of night rides as well. I got 8 rides in all throughout the event, and also stopped for some food and drink because it was hot. I mean, it was still in the low to mid 90s, even getting into the evening hours as the sun started to go down. It started to get tolerable. But generally speaking, before we talk to the ride, I do want to say that the crowd was very well behaved. Everyone wearing masks properly. Not a whole lot of schnozzes where the nose is sticking out over top of the mask. People, whether they had surgical masks or N95 style masks or cloth masks or the neck gaiters. Many people had the neck gaiters. Everybody was wearing them properly. Everybody was abiding by the social distancing markings on the line. Everyone was very, very well behaved. They were also doing a good job of staggering the seating sort of in the V-shaped pattern that we're used to on Diamondback. The odd number rows were riding in the middle 2 seats, and the even number rows were riding on the outer 2 seats. Every half an hour, clean the ride and whatnot. So a very good job done by both the attendees of the event and, of course, the employees. Were doing an exceptional job as well. Ride ran cleanly the entire 5 hours, no issues, no breakdowns or anything. So running 3 trains the entire time, and they did a very nice job overall for the event. So
Well, and like I went to the Mystic Timbers First Rider auction. I've been to a number of different Cedar Point First Rider auctions, Rougarou, Valraven. So generally speaking, those events are really fun to do. I know it costs a little bit more money. You can fundraise for it if you need to. But generally speaking, those are real relaxing evenings. I remember the Mystic Timbers night just being a laid back, relaxing evening, get a little food, ride a couple of times. It was just overall fun, and that's what's great about those auctions is the less number of people gives you a little bit more access to the ride, perhaps, and it's just a very laid back evening, and on top of all that, you're doing it for a good cause too. It's not like you're just throwing money away for nothing. And it looked like the merch pack that you got was pretty cool too, right?
Yeah, and it's the stuff is actually in my bedroom, so I won't go and fetch it. But we got our certificates, our certificate saying that we were part of the event, and we each got individual rider numbers. Those came in a nice Orion drawstring bag, which of course I carry those around. So I always like when they give those out because the wear and tear on those can be they're the thin ones, they fall apart after a while. We got a very nice Orion First Riders Auction T-shirt, which is very, very similar to this one, which I'm sure most of you already have. Might have even purchased it last year, like I did. I didn't wear it until I rode the ride, but it was the lighter blue. So this is like the heather blue with the cosmic, with like the white heather look to it, but this is like the darker royal blue. The shirt that we got for the First Riders auction was very similar to this, but then it had where the Kings Island was, it had like First Rider auction for a kid again down at the bottom, had all the sponsors on the back, and it was that lighter like turquoise blue. There's 3 trains. There's the silver train, a darker blue train, and then a lighter blue train. So the shirt was the color of that lighter blue train. Sort of like a sky blue turquoise type color. So it was really, really nice. And of course, for a First Rider auction night, I wore my Candymonium t-shirt because I had ridden that ride 2 days prior. And then when we went to Hersheypark on Sunday, I wore my Orion First Riders auction t-shirt and had people talking to me about the rides at the individual parks, which was someone on Twitter, and I don't know if it's a fan of ours or not, but somebody sniped me on my last ride of the night back in the back row of Orion, and they took a picture of me because I was wearing the Candymonium shirt, and they didn't know who I was because they didn't tag me. I think Mike actually said, "Hey, that looks like Dan the T-shirt guy."
Yeah, and I commented on that too because I said, "Look at this Mark wearing a Candymonium shirt."
Well, right, because and I was trying to figure this out. I was trying to. I wasn't actively asking people, but I was wondering if there was anyone else there at First Rider Night on Wednesday that had ridden Candymonium one of the 2 prior days, because they would have had to be a king size pass holder. That's the only way that you could have ridden Candymonium. So I dare to say, you're the only one
investing in season passes this year, Davey. So.
Well, I invested in these a while ago, but. But Andy, if I can be a jerk and say I was first, I might have been the first person to ride both of those rides.
That is true, and I held the record too for Valraven. That I rode Valraven maybe the most out of anybody in the first 4 days of operation, because I was there for the media day, then I was there for the First Riders, and I was there for the season pass holder thing. Like there were a number of consecutive days. I think I rode it once every day. I'm like, no one else in the world could say this.
Well, I remember
And nobody else in the world cared either. So to keep that perfectly clear.
Well, I remember way back in the day, like 2011, 2012 timeframe, when Clint Novak used to go to King's Dominion almost all the time, and he would usually go just to get walking in. He wouldn't even ride rides. He would just go there to walk with some of his friends. And I remember he did something insane, like the first 47 days of operation he was there, because the weekends only, and then he went and the only reason his streak stopped is because he had to go to a wedding or something. And he knew that was going to be the day that he wouldn't be able to go, and he made it all the way up until that day, and then he stopped going. But it was something insane like that.
That's funny.
So the event was great. So shall we talk about the ride?
Well, first give us your expectations for these two rides, because
sure.
Because you, I know me and you talked a lot about these two rides. We've kind of talked about them when we talked. Did we even talk about the most anticipated rides this year?
We did.
Okay.
Back in January, February, we made our lists. And okay. I distinctly recall.
God, what a different world that was.
Orion, I know. And I want to say that you had Orion first.
I might have that list somewhere. I don't even know.
And I'm going back here. I'm looking. Oh, I don't think I have it saved in my phone anymore. I think I deleted that note, sadly, because that's where I keep them. I'm looking back in the January, February time frame, and I don't see them. But I distinctly remember having Candymonium as number 1 and Orion as number 2.
No. Oh, there it is. I found it.
Oh,
I found it. Now the question is, was this my list or this was our? Did we do a combined list or no?
I think we did.
So on this list, whatever this was, this could. I think this was our combined list. It was 1 was Gwazi, 2 was Orion and Candymonium tied. So I think I had it a little bit higher. You had it a little bit lower.
Oh, okay. That's what it was. We both had Iron Gwazi number 1.
Yeah.
And then I had Candymonium 2 and Orion 3, and I think you were flip-flopped.
I think I had them flip-flopped, and then Jersey Devil 4, Stingray, Pantheon 5, yes. Emperor 7, Fly 8, and Primordial 9. That might be the same list for next year too.
So that's what it was. We both had Gwazi number 1, and then we had flip-flop 2 or 3 Candy and Orion. So my expectations going in were I expected to like Candymonium slightly more, and I'll probably switch between pronunciations, but the correct pronunciation is Candymonium. The way the sign is written, candy and monium look like 2 separate words. They're focusing on the candy. I'll probably call it candy from here on out in most instances. Texting back and forth, talking to people about it, I usually just call it candy. And I had selected Candy higher than Orion. And I was basing off of similar rides. I said, Orion to me looks very similar to Leviathan. Hopefully is a little better. Not sure if it will be a little better. Does not look like a Fury 325. Looks like it's closer to Leviathan than Fury 325. And Candymonium looks to me like Mako without the mid-course brake run and maybe a little bit more substance. And I rank Mako and Leviathan like really close to one another. I think I have Mako just a spot or 2 higher. So based off of that logic, I went with Candymonium as the one that I was expecting a little bit more out of. And when I rode Candymonium on Monday, the 29th, I only rode it once, rode it up front, had heard conflicting reports of the people who had been there first thing in the morning. I went in the evening hours, thought it would be running a little bit faster, less crowded. It certainly was. There was nobody there. I only rode it once up front and then went back home, knew I'd be coming back a few days later. I said, getting off of that ride, I said, I don't think Orion will be better than that ride. Mm-hmm. Similar to when I got off of Untamed on the Europe trip, I said, I don't think G-Force or Terran will be better than that ride. Adam and I said to each other, we thought that we had ridden the best ride on that trip right then and there. And it turns out we did. And so I had a similar reaction to Candymonium. I said,
I didn't know you went to Europe. That's funny.
Oh, well, yes, we should talk about it sometime. We're 2 hours apart. But I said, I don't think that Orion will be better than that. The airtime is very good on Candymonium. To make the comparison to Mako, I think Mako is the best comparison for Candymonium just out of the box. Similar train length, very similar layout, but it's sort of Candymonium to me fixes a lot of the things that Mako, and Mako doesn't have a heck of a lot wrong with it. Mako's a really good ride, but there's a handful of things that Mako, they almost don't make sense. The mid-course brake run, usually
Everything after that.
Well, and that's and the stuff after the mid-course brake run, there's one hill, there's sort of like an overbank, and then there's a helix, and that would be good if the brake run didn't hit you so hard. Now,
Do it at 5 miles an hour.
well, yeah, that's the thing. And, there's folks who have had rides where the train's pretty much empty and you don't get trim there, and they say it's a little bit better. But Candymonium doesn't even have the mid-course brake run to factor into that. It does have the trim on the third hill, the first hill after the turnaround. So that's there, and it does trim you. Generally, there's 2 trims on Candymonium. There's one on that third hill after the turnaround, and then there's one on the hill. So after that hill, you've got the speed hill, then you've got the upward helix, which goes into that off-camber drop, and then there's an airtime hill that goes into the fountain helix, and that airtime hill before the fountain helix also has a trim. Because our train was nearly empty on the first rider thing at Candymonium, we didn't get trimmed on either hill. In my experience on Sunday, going back, riding it 11 times, front, back, middle, wherever, I found that every time you got trimmed at least a little bit by at least one of them. If you had an emptier train, sometimes you wouldn't hit the first one, and then you would definitely hit the second one. Sometimes if you hit the first one, you wouldn't hit the second one at all. And I think there were 1 or 2 instances where we got hit by the first one a little bit and then got hit by the second one a little bit. It's not bad. I don't think they're quite as bad as the trims on Mako. Sometimes the trims on Mako can really slow you down a little bit. So that's one thing. The lack of the mid-course brake run is definitely a plus over Mako for sure. And generally speaking, I thought Candymonium had better variety. And that sounds a little weird when we're talking about B&M hypercoasters, because generally they all follow the same formula. But Candymonium does have a little bit of uniqueness to it. The drop, Candymonium doesn't have the little overbank that Mako has after the first drop. They both got a big hill. They've got a very similarly shaped turnaround. And then after the turnaround, Mako, I think, has one big hill and then another big hill that goes into a drop turn. Candymonium has one big hill and then the speed hill. Mako then has the speed hill into the mid-course brake run. So basically, in place of Mako's mid-course brake run, on Candymonium, you get this nice little upward helix, which then goes into this off-axis stangle dive, off-camber drop turn. It's not really a turn. And obviously folks have certainly seen it, but it's a tight right-hand turn upwards, and then when you get to the top, it does like an RMC type thing where it banks you off to the left, and then while you're banking to the left, you do a drop. So it's almost like a reverse wave turn of sorts. It's very similar to how like a Twisted Colossus or an Iron Rattler sort of does that thing where it goes up one way and then throws you the other way. There's plenty of RMCs that do similar things to that. It's that type of element, and that's basically what you're getting in place of Mako's mid-course brake run. So and then you've got the small hill, you've got a helix, then you go up into the brake run. So Mako has very similar elements to that. So just for that reason alone, Candymonium to me is at least slightly better than Mako. And then rode it in front, and then going back and riding it front back. I've said this about other rides before, but Candymonium to me wasn't particularly better in the front or the back. It was just different. The drops are most certainly better in the back, which you would expect. I think there's slightly more sustained airtime in the back, just because you're out of your seat all the way through the drops. The hills are quite steep, which some of the older B&M hypers like a Raging Bull or a Nitro, the drops don't seem as steep to me. Whereas on rides like Mako and now Candymonium, I think they are much steeper. So you get more of that airtime in the back seat. The airtime in the front seat is very much like a behemoth. I think on those first several hills, and then you've got the speed hill in there, which is really nice. But those first couple of hills and the turnaround reminded me very much of Behemoth in the front. In the back, I would say it reminded me very much of like a Diamondback, and having ridden Diamondback just a few days later, and then Candymonium again. I drew a lot of comparisons to Diamondback and Candymonium. I think if you ride Candymonium in the front, it feels a lot like a Behemoth, and if you ride it in the back, it feels a lot like a Diamondback. And I say that in the best way possible for both of those rides, because I think both of those rides are very, very good. And I would rank it similarly to those. I don't know if it's necessarily better. I've got, Behemoth was a milestone coaster for me. There's a little bit of sentimental value there. I get to marathon that ride every year, a number of times. Diamondback, Candymonium, having ridden them, in quick succession, probably Diamondback ever so slightly, because it is longer, and it's got a couple of extra drops to it. So generally speaking, if you're going to make the comparison there, I think Diamondback is a very fair comparison. I think Diamondback's slightly better. It's slightly bigger, and you've got a few more drops. And I think the longer trains get you some more extreme airtime on those drops. But generally speaking, Candymonium gets 2 big thumbs up for me.
That's real interesting that you put Diamondback maybe slightly better than Candymonium. And for me, like Diamondback,
and I'll say this. I did move Diamondback up a little bit in my rankings after riding it this past weekend too, as you know that I love to do. So if we leave out
in your top 20, so it's
Well, right, and that's the thing. So if you were to leave out the Giga coasters, let's leave out the Giga coasters, and we can get into Orion here and see how that stacks up. But if I look at just the B&M hyper coasters, yes, make fun of me for Apollo's Chariot, that's fine. But then I would go after Apollo's Chariot. I would go Behemoth. Hold on, I gotta look now. Behemoth, Diamondback, Candymonium, and then Mako, in that order.
That doesn't, yeah, that's. I'm not a huge Behemoth fan because I don't ride it as much as you do.
Mm-hmm.
I have currently my hypers are a little bit different because I still have Goliath in there. I still love
Goliath. See, I haven't ridden Goliath in number. I think Goliath is right after that group for me.
Because I have Goliath is for B&M hypers. I've got Goliath, then Diamondback, and then Behemoth. And then after that, like Mako, I think I even have the Goliath, the mini hyper, or man, that needs a new name because we got Giga coasters, and we now need something for Laurent's Goliath.
Yeah, and right after that grouping, I have Goliath, and then Silver Star is the next two in there. So, and Silver Star, I made a lot of comparisons to Diamondback.
I thought for sure after you rode Candymonium the first night, you're pretty hyped about it, and for it not to be better than Diamondback is a little surprising to me, to be honest with you.
Well, and again, that was I think that was a product of a little bit of excitement having not ridden a coaster in 7 months here. Actually, more than that for me, really, since October. So it's been 9 months since I rode a coaster, number one. Didn't have to wait at all, walked right up, got right in the front seat, had been anticipating this ride quite a bit. And again, with almost a fully empty train, didn't get trimmed at all on that first ride, which is not the norm. So that certainly does help. I mean, Raging Bull is a good example of if you don't get trimmed, it can be a pretty good ride. I think that was
a completely different ride if you don't get trimmed.
Well, right. And so riding it 11 more times on the following Sunday, I think I got more of the usual ride on Candymonium, and certainly and that's not bad by any means. I was thinking after that first ride, Candymonium, Behemoth, they're right kind of there. And then I think it's a few spots lower than that, just below Behemoth and Diamondback. But Candymonium for me, I would place on my list at number 18 right now. If I were to vote in the thrilling 32 right now, it would be at my number 18 slot.
I think I have Diamondback right around 12 or 13 right now. So my Diamondback's a little bit higher, but not by much, really, when you think about it.
Well, and so to sort of transition here, that I have Leviathan down at Leviathan after this trip. I have down at 25, and I have Mako at 23. So at this point, we've got Candymonium, a little bit better than Mako, better than Leviathan. So now all of a sudden it's sort of setting up for Orion to fall somewhere in between there, right? That's what was being set up to happen for me. Now Orion, Candymonium was exactly what I expected it to be, and I got exactly out of it what I wanted to, and I was very, very happy with that. Even that, I said if they trim the hell out of you, it could be kind of boring in that second half, but they don't. The biggest thing with me for Candymonium, the variety of elements that it had, that helix is really intense, and then going into that off camber turn, you have to be sitting on the unload side of the train, which is the right side of the train when you're facing forward, and you get thrown up in that element. When you're on the left side, it kind of drops out from under you and it's not nearly as intense. But when you're on that right side of the train, there's some really good positive G's in that helix because it's tight, and it's a really good sequence. You've got the big airtime hill, then you've got the speed hill, which you and I both love. You made that face about Iron Rattler with Leviathan speed hill, but you've got the speed hill, and then you've got this really tight helix, and then you've got this weird lateral and lateral force with the airtime. It's a really, really good sequence. Certainly that sequence is the highlight of the ride for me on Candymonium, and it's just the B&M hypers generally don't have that type of variety in quick succession where you've got floating airtime, ejector airtime, and then lateral and airtime together. It's really a nice mix. Candymonium does have a really nice mix between the airtime, the drop, a little bit of positive G's in both of the helixes, the turnaround, a little bit of that lateral force that I talked about, and then some of the visuals. Once that fountain's up and running, and the grass kind of grows in, which it hasn't yet, it's going to look really nice too. So overall, very, very pleased. Orion, on the other hand, was the ride that I expected to not be overly enthusiastic about, because it just doesn't look like a Fury 325. And I'm not going to sit here and tell you that it is Fury 325 because it's not. The goal for me, or I guess the expectation or the hope, was that, well, I hope that it's better than Leviathan, right? Because Leviathan is a ride that has its flaws.
The whole
and Leviathan, what's that?
The whole second half.
Well, yeah. I mean, kinda. I mean, there's a nice airtime hill in there, but Leviathan. And when you think about, if you break it down element by element, after the first drop, what does Leviathan do? It's got a turn. And what does Orion do? Well, it's got a turn. It's a little bit different type of a turn. After that, what does Leviathan do? It's got the speed hill. Well, Orion has that a little bit later on. Then it does a big hill. Well, Orion does that a little bit later on. After the big hill, Leviathan's got a turnaround. Well, Orion's got a turnaround. After the turnaround, what does Leviathan do? It kind of does this turn. Orion kind of has that going into the speed hill, but that's more of an element. After that, what does Leviathan do? It's got another airtime hill. Orion doesn't have another big pronounced airtime hill. So that's kind of the concern right off the bat. And then after that hill, Leviathan has a 90-degree turn, a bank turn, which doesn't really have a tremendous amount of force. So in place of the second big airtime hill, Orion has sort of the turn sort of like the miniature version of the Fury turnaround, which then hops into the Breakron. But then you've got the Helix, which people are calling Orion's belt. So that's what they've called that there. So you've got that, which Leviathan doesn't have anything really like that. Fury certainly has a Helix, but it's a bigger, more panoramic type of Helix, whereas Orion's is much tighter.
Mm-hmm.
So I'll say this, and I think most people who've ridden Orion several times will agree that the front seat is great for the speed, great for the visual. Certainly not the most intense location on the train. The ride gets progressively more intense as you go towards the back, peaking with the most intense ride being in the back of the train. And I think almost everybody I've spoken to is in overwhelming agreement with that. The first drop, a tremendous first drop. Certainly, if you had me ride Fury's drop, Orion's drop, and Leviathan's drop in quick succession and asked me to pick out which one was the smallest of the three, probably couldn't tell you. It certainly feels very big, and it is. I mean, it is a 300-foot drop. So a tremendous first drop. And maybe the surprise of the ride comes right after the first drop. That wave turn is really effing good. and that's the element that we looked at probably more than any other element on that ride and said, boy, that's just kind of a throwaway to get a little farther away, isn't it? But it was kind of to the point where, well, it's not really banked enough for you to fall out of your seat, but it's not really shaped in the same way that some of the elements on Fury or even like the RMCs are to give you airtime. So what's actually going to happen here? But sure enough, you do float out of your seat, and you've got some nice lateral forces, especially again on the right-hand side of the train where you're on the high side. And it flattens out just at the right point where it starts going down the drop, where you're still floating out of your seat pretty much all the way down the drop. It's a less abrupt version, I think, of the off-camber drop that Candymonium kind of offers. It just doesn't have a bank turn going into it. But the wave turn certainly surprised me, and it was at that point of the ride where I said, you know what, they might have something here. The turnaround then, you kind of go up and you get a little bit of floating airtime in the front seat and a little bit in the back. But in the back seat, when it starts to whip around into that downwards turn and that downward spiral, you really pick up some speed, and that drop turn is really tight and it's really intense. I found myself, and maybe some other people didn't, but I found myself graying out just a little bit as we got to the bottom of that turn. And what's interesting is when you get down there, then you change direction and you start to turn to the left, but you're still having that heaviness of the positive G's of coming out of that drop. And for me, just as I started to lose the gray out, you're into the speed hill, and I'm coming out of my seat. Mm-hmm. So the gray out to me, it wasn't like an I-305 type gray out or anything, but it was just enough to the point where my vision got just a little bit blurry, and as soon as I could see clearly again, you were into that speed hill, and I was out of my seat, which was really, really nice. And on the right side of the train, I will say that drop turn, the turnaround, is better on the left side because you get the laterals and you're sort of falling out to the left a little bit. But on the right edge, because you sort of do a left-hand bank into the speed hill, on the right side, as you start to come out of your seat, you're also getting thrown out to the side just a little bit. So I think the right edge of the train is maybe the spot there. I couldn't decide necessarily between right or left edge. Candymonium, the right edge, is certainly the better edge, whereas Orion, it's funny, Candymonium wasn't really better or worse front to back, but right to left there was a big difference, and right was far better. Orion was the exact flip-flop, where I didn't feel a huge difference left to right, but I thought front and back made all the difference. So then you've got the speed hill, which is everything you would expect it to be, very Leviathan like, Mako, Candymonium, those B&M speed hills. Very, very fast at this point still, too. Then you get the big airtime hill. The trim, it's kind of like, at least on our rides, the trim was there. It didn't bother rides. Fury's trim doesn't really hurt the ride at all. I don't think it doesn't really slow you down a ton. I think it just taps you a little bit. This wasn't like a full-on grab, but you felt it a little bit more than I have on other rides. It's not even annoying. It's just a slight nuisance, I think is what I would call it. I wish it was just a little bit lighter. But still the airtime going over the top, very good, especially in the back. You get the airtime all the way down that drop. And then Orion's belt, the helix there, some really, really nice positive G-forces there. Again, a little bit of a gray out for me again. Certainly just as it starts to loosen up on the intensity a little bit, it starts to dive back down and pick up some speed. And then the upward turn, if you can envision a smaller version of the first half of Fury's treble clef, where it's going up and to the right, and then you've got some airtime because of the way the hill's shaped. This does that, only you're turning to the left. Actually, really good airtime there. Front to back, the airtime was actually very, very good. And then really good very good airtime. So much more airtime on Orion than I would have expected. And I am happy to say that it exceeded my expectations. And I was actually quite surprised to be saying that, but I enjoyed the ride quite a bit.
Well, you haven't, so we kind of got, Orion, we got Candymonium. We still don't know which one's better. I think at this point we can assume, I think a lot of people have already been led to the assumption of which one's better. But we also need to answer the question of what's the best Giga in Ohio?
Well, yeah. So I will say that looking at my rankings here, I do have Orion slightly higher than Candymonium for the trip. I didn't expect that to be the case after riding Candymonium for the first time, but having ridden them both in quick succession and having several rides, find a favorite seat on probably the best seat on both rides. If I were to have it, I do like Orion slightly better. I think Orion has a nice variety of elements. It's got good speed. It's got a good drop. It's got some good airtime. It's got some positive G-force moments. Some lateral forces are mixed in there. It's got a nice variety of elements, even though it is a little bit shorter than a Fury 325. I didn't get off either ride. A lot of people were getting off of both rides and saying, "Oh, the ride's too short." I didn't get off either ride thinking to myself that the ride was too short. And I know that that's a complaint that I used to have about a lot of rides. And I think I found myself not complaining about that so much. Re-riding Outlaw Run a couple years ago, I didn't have the length complaint that I did before. I think it's more of a matter of pacing.
Like, that's clearly the RMC effect, because you're used to riding rides like Wicked Cyclone, and they go on forever, and you're like, damn, I wish this thing was over. And now you finally said, you know what, I'd rather have a shorter ride. So you finally came to your senses a little bit.
Yeah, maybe that's the case. It's, for me, it's become, I don't know if it's just riding so many new rides the last couple of years or what, but for me, it's become more about pacing, rhythm, and variety, and just the overall ride. And to me, both of these rides flowed really well. They had a nice mix of different types of forces, different types of elements, certainly as much as a B&M Giga can have, where they tend to follow the same formula. But I was really impressed and taken by surprise by the variety of forces that both rides have. But I think for me, the speed and the fact that the intensity in some of the turns and at the bottom of some of the drops on Orion, which took me by surprise. I did not expect the ride to be as intense as it was. I think the intensity is just there on Orion, and it's Candymonium is exactly what you think it is, whereas Orion, I think, might catch you off guard with its intensity a little bit. So I'd put Orion slightly higher. If I'm gonna tell you exactly where I decided to put it. I decided to put it at number 12 on my Steel list, which is a lot higher than I would have expected. Telling you Leviathan was at, but I put Orion at 12.
So I guess that begs the question then. Where do you have Millennium?
Okay. So obviously, like I said, Orion is no Fury 325. It's not. And it's better than Leviathan. It really is. So that puts it somewhere, and I think most people probably have Fury at the top, and Leviathan's probably towards the bottom, if not at the bottom. So then the discussion becomes Orion, Millennium Force, Intimidator 305. And the debate for me, pretty much the entire time that we were riding it, I was thinking about that group of three. And I rank all three of them in a cluster of three right together. For me, Millennium Force has this event-like aura about it. It all has, just because of the iconic nature of what Millennium Force is. That being said, I think Orion is an intense ride. Millennium has a really good drop, so does Orion. Millennium has two really big airtime hills. Orion has one. They both have really good speed hills. And they've both got a lot of turns and a lot of speed. I think Orion's turns and positive G-forces are more intense than Millennium's. I think maybe the night ride on Millennium Force is still the superior night ride. But I think if you're just looking at the ride and you had Millennium Force and Orion next to each other, and I could ride in any seat I want on either ride, I think I very slightly lean towards Orion. It's not by much. And if you give me the opportunity on Millennium Force to put the lap bar anywhere I want and just go on the seatbelt, I might take that. But Orion and Millennium Force, I think you could push me into calling it a coin flip. But I think one of the things that Millennium has always had going for it is, well, the station's really cool and you've got the music kind of pumping you up. Well, Orion has that too. Orion has the IMA score music, which is really, really cool, and it's playing throughout the whole area. I mean, Orion does sort of have this, the area around Orion does sort of have this feel of it's transported you out of the park and you're doing something a little bit different. And I think Millennium Force has that same feel. So I think it's a little bit unfair to say that Millennium has that and Orion doesn't. It's certainly different, but I think Orion does have a little bit of that. But purely just going off of the roller coaster, I think Orion is the slightly better roller coaster. And it's 20 years newer. It ought to be at least a little bit better, I think. For me, then I started thinking about Intimidator 305. Because I really like the intensity of Intimidator 305. And it's I've always kind of gone back and forth on Millennium or I-305 because of that intensity. It's always been real difficult for me, and it always changes based on whichever one I've ridden more recently. But Intimidator 305 has that one trim, which kind of really ruins the it doesn't ruin it, but it sort of just it lessens the ending of Intimidator 305 because it's balls to the wall all the way up until that point, and then the last two hills could be insane ejector air time, and it's just decent ejector air time. And Orion is certainly more comfortable with the restraints. So I would say of that middle three, I would go Orion, I-305, Millennium Force in that order. And I wouldn't argue with anyone who has those three in any other order. You could put those three rides in any order, and I wouldn't really argue with you. But for me, I rank Orion 12, I-305 13, Millennium Force 14.
So they're all right there in that grouping together. That's interesting. You know, because I'm
right there. Fury is definitely the best. I think Leviathan is definitely the weakest. It's not by a tremendous amount. But Millennium, I-305, and Orion, I think you can put those three in a cluster, and you can put them in any order, and I wouldn't argue with you in any order you have them. But that's the order I have them in, and they're all a little bit better than Candymonium. And that's not a knock on Candy either. That's not a knock on Candy either. I enjoyed the hell out of both of these rides. Orion took me more by surprise. Candymonium was exactly what I thought it would be, exactly what I wanted. I've got a lovely B&M Hypercoaster in my backyard now, which I've never been a big Nitro fan. So Candymonium will get me to buy a Hersheypark season pass probably for the foreseeable future. If it wasn't good, and if it wasn't what I wanted, maybe I wouldn't. But Candymonium will get me probably to get a Hershey pass for the foreseeable future at the right price point. And Orion, I think, has just added another piece to the Kings Island puzzle. And I mean, you look at, we talk about the Cedar Fair coaster collections after Cedar Point and who has the best, right? And before Mystic Timbers, I think you could have made arguments a lot of different ways. Before Mystic Timbers was built with King's Dominion, you had I-305, you had Volcano, you had Dominator, then they added Twisted Timbers, Kings Island, then you had Mystic Timbers, Diamondback, Banshee, Beast. I always liked Firehawk, a good supporting cast there. Carowinds, you got Fury, Intimidator, Afterburn. Now with Copperhead Strike, they lack the wood coaster that's really a standout. But I think Orion is really what kind of puts Kings Island into that very solid number 2 coaster collection in the Cedar Fair chain overall right now. They've got the variety with all the different types of rides, the inverted coaster, the hyper coaster, the Giga coaster. Now they've got an excellent wood coaster collection, arguably one of the best in the world, anchored by Mystic Timbers and Beast, a good supporting cast with rides like the Bat, Invertigo, Racer, Adventure Express, Backlot, and they've taken out a lot of the junk, right? Taking out Vortex, which some people liked, but most people disliked very much. So this is a Firehawk was my 100th coaster, a little bit of a sentimental value, but there's no question that this is a good trade-off in that department. So.
And I think the even better argument now is over the last 3 years, Ohio has just solidified itself as really the best state for roller coasters. I don't even think there's an argument to be made anymore. With the addition of Mystic Timbers, Vengeance, and now Orion, anyone that would name any other state is just being stupid at that point. Because Ohio, you now have these top-of-the-line coasters. You've got some of the best coasters in the world at Cedar Point. You've got the best coaster, Steel Vengeance, ever. You've got now Orion and Millennium Force, 2 of the best Gigas that you can find outside of Fury 325. Ohio has just become stacked with quality roller coasters from top to bottom. And I don't even think there is an argument to be made. Like, people are like, oh, do a show on it. No, thank you. There's no reason to do a show.
Well, and back when we did a show on it several years ago, when we first started doing the YouTube,
there was a debate.
There was a debate, and the debate was between Pennsylvania and Ohio. Yeah. And I think where we came down, and I think in some regards we agreed at the time, it was that Ohio certainly has the best, and then Pennsylvania had, Ohio had the quality, and Pennsylvania had the quantity and also the variety, because it has it's got many big parks, like your Hersheyparks and your Dorney parks, and even your Kennywood's to a point. But then it also had a lot of your small parks, your Waldemers, your Knoebels, now Sesame Place, Lakemont, you know, all these little places that sort of just add up over time. And it's getting really hard. I mean, Pennsylvania still has the wood coasters, I think, in general, over Ohio. But once you get outside of that, Ohio has, you have Mystic Timbers, you have Blue Streak, you have Beast, you have Racer. I mean, Pennsylvania certainly has the wood coasters out of Ohio, but the steel coasters of Ohio are just so overwhelmingly over the top better than any other state. Even the states that have tons of coasters like California and Florida and you know, your Missouris and Virginias, they can't hold a candle to the Ohio Steel Coaster collection,
and
especially not with this edition.
And the thing is, Pennsylvania really hasn't added all that much. They added Steel Curtain at Kennywood. They've added Laugh Track and Candymonium. Like, these aren't world-breaking coasters. Candymonium is probably the best of that bunch, is probably their best addition that they've – Dorney's added absolutely nothing since we've done that show. And to be honest with you, I don't even think Banshee was at Kings Island when we did that show.
Well, we started the YouTube channel at the end of 2014, so Banshee would have just opened.
Okay, so Banshee probably would have just been there. So it's kind of like it's kind of like, you know, Cedar Point and Kings Island. There's no sign of stopping.
We didn't have Mystic Timbers. We didn't. Yeah, when we did that show, we didn't have Mystic Timbers. We probably hadn't ridden Rougarou yet. We knew that it was happening. We didn't have Valraven, obviously. We didn't have Steel Vengeance, obviously. We didn't have Orion, obviously. And then in the Pennsylvania department, really the only two rides that we didn't have Steel Curtain, we didn't have Candymonium, and we didn't have Oscar's Wacky Taxi. I don't think Oscar changes the discussion at all. I think,
I'm embarrassed that you even brought it up, to be honest.
Well, Candymonium and Steel Curtain certainly add something there. But I mean, to me, I think you know, the discussion is Candymonium maybe the best steel coaster in Pennsylvania, and I think there's an argument for that. I think the two coasters that people would probably argue are either Sky Rush, which is you know, basically you could throw a softball from Candymonium and hit Sky Rush, and then Phantom's Revenge out at Kennywood. I think are the other two that you would get the argument for.
So, you know, with all that being said, it seems like you had a really great time at both Candymonium and Orion. Overall, probably a great addition to Kings Island. So thanks for sharing that with us. But also, if you've noticed here, I've got the brand new COASTER-net Uncut shirt on here. Danny, you've got one too at your house in your mailbox right now, I think. But these are on sale. We only have about we only have about 10 of them left. So if you want one, they are on sale at the COASTER-net store. So you can go get those. I think they're like $19 shipped or something like that. So they're really soft. The nice NWO style logo there with the COASTER-net Uncut. So if you have followed the NWO from 24 years ago, you'll understand what this is going on here.
Careful, you're spelling it.
Well, seriously. So as always, I am Andrew Barczak from Chicago, Illinois.
Danny Miller from Binghamton, New York.
Right on, Ride Warriors.
See you guys.